Well, in the last few minutes we have left with Tyler Boudreau, who's a 12-year veteran of the Marine Corps Infantry and also author of Packing Inferno, The Unmaking of a Marine. We saw John Kerry during his election. Videos came out from when he came back from Vietnam and was very critical of some of the things that he and his squad and his platoon and the people he was there with engaged in. Some called them atrocities, some called them immoral acts. You were there during the Abu Ghraib scandal.
By the way, he was speaking, that speech he gave was not everything that he had done and seen. He was speaking about the findings of Winter Soldier investigations, and he was representing them. And it's important to point out that all
not
those
everything
things
he
that
discussed
he described was not what he saw, but what many people had testified as seeing.
You're absolutely right. In your experience, are those types of things going on a tiny bit, not at all that you're aware of? You're aware, but you haven't seen firsthand? Quantify it a little bit for our audience.
I think the distinction between, they had actually a Winter Soldier investigation for Iraq and Afghanistan, and there was a distinction between Vietnam and Iraq that I actually point out in my book, Packing Inferno, that I think is important. I don't think that the level of atrocities and war crimes are as common and widespread in the current conflicts as they were in Vietnam. But one of the main reasons is because we're not in a very conventional war like, Vietnam. I mean, Vietnam was kind of categorized as a counterinsurgency, but I mean, it's still straight up a lot of warfare, a lot of straight up large unit versus large unit battles. And in that's a lot of bloodshed. And people, it takes soldiers to a limit that many of the soldiers now are not taken to. I mean, it's just a lot of blood, and you become, talk about desensitized. How much blood can you see spilled either of your friends or of the enemy before it just doesn't bother you anymore?
Right.
And it's a lot easier to get to that point of atrocity in that environment. Now here, Iraq is just not as dangerous a place. I mean, hey, look, I'm not going to, belittle the sacrifices that some have made, but at the same time, in all of these years, we haven't even come remotely close to the number of killed in action of Vietnam. Not even close.
Right.
So clearly, it's not as dangerous a place. And so, what I think is important to look at as far as what's morally wrong with the war in Iraq is not so much what is a war crime, what is illegal, but what is actually legal. What are they doing that is within someone's definition of the law? So, for instance, these raids and these checkpoints, et cetera, they are within some form of international law,
right? Except
that they are creating morally questionable scenarios. A lot of them.
For example.
Well, the checkpoint situation is a classic example. You have these guys on a road, and they're told, don't let anybody by. And they're worried about car bombers. It's a warranted concern. But the problem is that a lot of the people who don't stop at the checkpoint do so because they're scared or confused or whatever it is, whatever the reason is. But what they're not is car bombers. So the guys on the checkpoint, they'll shoot because they're entitled to and because they're scared or because they're under pressure. And they're completely justified in their action, but then they find out after the fact that, oh no, it's somebody who was confused or something like that, some innocent person. I mean, they're innocent. There's no getting around that.
Sure.
And you say to the young Marine or soldier, hey, you were justified, no problem. But that doesn't carry much weight with the individual when he or she comes home and has that image of some innocent person shot by his hands. And you get enough of those, and we had plenty, and they continue to unravel. And this is just one small, scenario. That's the kind of situation that you want to look at and say, and those are, by the way, small scale numbers.
It's one example.
In terms of the real casualties that we've inflicted in Iraq, in terms of evaluating, if you want to say, okay, how much good have we done? How much destruction have we done? The real destruction in our presence has not been from the guys on the ground. I mean, it's not really their hands that have been inflicting the most damage. It's mostly the bombing campaigns that took place right from the beginning, and then on, and all of the damage to infrastructure and the lack of water and medical supplies and personnel, et cetera, et cetera. Those are the things that have the most, far-reaching, inflicting the far-reaching damage. They just came out with some study about Fallujah that said that since '04, the infant mortality, the child cancer, and what do you call it when they have deformities and whatnot, are like off the charts,
Right.
relative to many other countries. And they didn't characterize it. They didn't say why. They just said, look, this is the situation. But
Right.
I think we have a pretty fair idea, from all of the ordnance that was dropped in that city, that probably has something to do with it.
I think you're right. I think you're absolutely right. Well, I want to remind our audience we've been speaking with Tyler Boudreau, 12-year veteran of the Marine Corps Infantry. The book is Packing Inferno, The Unmaking of a Marine. I'll tell you, your writing is excellent. I've just recently started doing I have a regular column and doing a little more writing. When I write stuff and then I read back, I hate what I've written. I think the quality of your writing is really excellent, both the book and the article, and all of the articles, and I recommend our audience check them out. So thanks so much for coming in.
Thanks for having me.